Okay, for the final session today, we've got Jason Webb, Assistant Professor of Visual Communications, SI Newhouse School of Public Communications. This one is extending your mobile reality.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry I'm keeping you from the wonderful food that's outside and some of the drinks out there and fun stuff, but trust me, this is gonna be a lot of fun and hopefully interactive. At any point, we're not gonna wait until the end. If you wanna stop me and ask a question, please stop me, and we'll have a conversation about this stuff. I'm gonna nerd out a little bit, and I'm gonna show you guys some really cool nerdy things. Let me see if this is working or not. I went the right way, I swear. There we go. Like I said, we're going to talk about extending your mobile reality. So a little bit about myself, if I can get this to work. There we go. My name is Dr. Jason Webb. Like I said, work here at the Newhouse School with the Visual Communications. I teach in the motion design or design group. I teach immersive media. Next semester, I'm going to be teaching a class on social VR. I teach classes for motion design and motion design for production. And I work with the XR research lab here, helping facilitate a lot of the research on how we extend our reality. My background, which is kind of fun, we'll talk about that. I taught K-12 for 14 years. And as a K-12 teacher, one of the things that I learned is if you're going to do something when it comes to storytelling in K-12, you got to do it for free. So we had to find ways to do storytelling for free. And guess where we gravitated towards? Mobile media. I spent 1 year, I raised $5,000 and bought this beautiful camera with all these lenses and said, my communication students are going to love this. They're going to go out and they're going to film all these amazing videos. They're going to do some amazing storytelling. They're going to do this journalistic look. They're going to have this cool film look to everything. And then that year is when the Apple iPhone came out and said, look at the camera we got here. And guess how many times that camera went out my door? Zero. Zilch, never went out the door again. It stayed on a tripod right in the studio, and that's what we used it for, is for studio production. It never went out the door. When I told kids, go out and do an interview, they're like, got it, and ran out with their phones. I was like, this is hilarious. This is great. And then when the iPad cameras got a lot better, you see kids running around the hallways with iPads in their hands, chasing down stories and getting stories that way. So for years, when I would talk at conferences, I would talk about how to give pro tips on how to create Hollywood content using mobile media. And it was a lot of fun. I would show how to do like animation and how to do all these cool things with like apps on your phone and be able to get in there and tell these cool stories. And then I met Dan Pacheco with the Google nerdy glasses. And he said, hey, check this technology out. And I went, crap, well, this is going to change some things for me. And I started looking into how I could tell stories in space. And I became more involved with how space really becomes important for the way that I tell stories. And utilizing that technology, not as a tool, but a symbiotic thing that we do and we create with. It's not just a tool. The technology we're using, to me, as a technologist or someone who likes to proclaim to be a nerd, is something that is part of what I do. I don't look at it as something that like, oh, I need to figure out what I'm doing. It's what am I using to do this thing and to do the thing. And it was exciting to kind of transition from K-12 and playing around and creating all these stories to actually creating spaces with these stories. And one of the things I want to talk about is how we can create those stories and do some really cool things. Here's some things we're going to talk about in the next couple of slides. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I did not read the emails properly, and that is my fault. I had all these really cool demos that I was going to do live, but we're just going to slide through some slides, which I found out today. So that is completely my fault. So we adapted and we made this fun. So one of the things I want to define first is this, the XR consortium, or the umbrella terms that we deal with. When we talk about XR, I just wanted to check on that. When we talk about XR, extended reality, we're talking about umbrella definition up here. And what that means is we start more towards reality. We're extending our reality. So we have, all the way to the right, augmented reality. We're augmenting reality, meaning I'm taking 3D objects and I'm adding them to my reality. And I'm being able to see them and possibly interact with them. That's where a lot of my playing started. Let me add like a box. And what can I do with that box? Can I move it? Can I walk through it? Can I look in it? There's some cool things I can do. So I'm working with this environment. It's not really part of the environment. I can overlay it, but there's not much I can do with it. And I thought, okay, what else can we do? Well, then I started playing around with mixed reality and said, can I make it work with the world? Can I take a digital ball and flick it off of the wall and have it come back to me? So I started playing with some technology that gave me that capability, and Unity, started gravitating towards Unreal, and I kind of was like, that's kind of cool, but really got into virtual reality, where I took that farthest away reality and dropped people into these spaces and said, I'm going to take you out of reality and drop you into a virtual one and see how you interact. My whole research in my PhD was understanding how people make sense of that space. My whole goal moving forward after my PhD is taking that and making it closer to reality, trying to bridge that gap of making virtual reality realer. But what we got to do is we got to understand these middle two things a little bit more to make that happen. Recently, Apple came out and made my life a whole lot easier with the spatial VR, or mixed reality. With spatial, what you're able to do in the Apple Vision Pro is actually add those things to your space a lot easier, make them a little bit more mixed reality, where you can interact with that digital asset. And like you see here with the cat, I can have stuff weave in between tables and chairs because it recognizes that space. So a lot of stuff coming from LiDAR technology and whatnot that allows us to be able to do spatial video that makes it a lot more involved. So we need to understand these things a little bit more to be able to get to that space. And in that journey, I came up with some fun things that I do with my students. I'm going to show you today. One of the ones that we talk about, though, before we get into it, when we talk about immersive design, immersive storytelling, is why do we do this? All right, I want my stories to be interactive. I want to be a part of that story. A big part of storytelling is emotional responses, too. I want to be able to have some emotion kind of integrated into the stories I tell. And if I can make them interactive, that's going to draw the viewer in. That's going to draw the person in and make them a participant in the story itself. So how do we do that? Can we do that with augmented reality? Can we do what happens in the Minority Report and get people like interacting and being able to move through a space and interact with that space itself? How do we make that look and feel? How do we make the stories responsive? Can I go into a space and be able to interact with the people there and have a conversation with people that possibly were part of those stories? How do I make that work? All right. And again, that goes to generative participatory work, where you can generate stories in those spaces. And of course, the last one that I always like to talk about when it comes to immersive storytelling is, how do I simulate? How do I make this something that I can do over and over and over again? I got something really cool to show you in a little bit. All right. So again, why immersive storytelling? There's all these cool things that we can get into. I'm not going to go line by line on this one, but it's very cool to think about why we're doing these things and why is mobile technology such a big part of it. And when I say mobile technology, I do bring into the fact that the Meta headset is not mobile. We can go anywhere with that and set up shop and do mixed reality with it. We can do spatial reality. We can do augmented reality with the headset with a pass-through. The Apple Vision Pro, if you've ever looked up Apple Vision Pros in the wild, it is absolutely hilarious of what people are doing in the wild with the Apple Vision Pros on. There are videos and pictures of people walking through New York City with the Apple Vision Pro on, just hanging out and doing a video and having interactions. All right. Yeah, with a pass-through. So the Apple Vision Pro has like a crystal clear pass-through on it. I wouldn't say hyper realistic, but it's pretty cool. And you see, yes. Yep, I'll bring mine in for a couple demos. I did one where in the Apple Vision Pro at any moment, because we're in Syracuse, you can snap and it starts snowing. So when you're in that space, you can be in this room and everything will start snowing and you'll see like a little bit of snow pile up. And then Apple just updated a couple of weeks ago and it broke all my code. So I got to go back and fix that. But there's some really cool things that you can do with that. And you're seeing people more on airplanes with the Meta Quest headsets on. You're seeing people interact in a lot of different ways. All right. The other cool thing is Meta, Snapchat, and a couple of other companies started doing interactive devices that become very fluid with the people that are using them. So if you start thinking about mobile technology, we're slowly moving away from just having the phones to being able to have devices that are on us and wearable at all times. How do we start gravitating towards storytelling that incorporates those? So what I did was I started working with my students and came up with some ways to introduce them into augmented reality, doing some really cool things. This right here, as you can see, my avatar pops up a lot. It's the avatar that I created in Ready Player Me. We're in a mobile technology conference. Go ahead and take your phone out and scan that. That QR code will actually introduce you to myself. This is my business introduction. So what this does with my students is I have them make a business card with a QR code on it. When they meet somebody, they hold out their QR code, they scan that QR code, and their avatar pops up on the business card and introduces themselves to whoever it is that they want to interact with. This one is used a 3-step process. We design our avatar in Ready Player Me. We go into deepmotion.ai. I have them record themselves, video and audio. And what that does is it turns them into a 3D model that is motion captured. So the AI actually recognizes your video movement and turns it into a 3D model represented skeletal structure, or if you know anything about rigging, it turns it into a rig that is applied to the Ready Player Me. Last but not least, put it all together in Ionic, or Eighth Wall. For those of you that work in the professional field, Eighth Wall is a great platform to be able to host and produce AR for use in general use. One of the cool things that got me hooked on them was I was able to make a remote control avatar. So what I can do is scan a space, put my avatar in that space, and I can put my avatar in it and have my avatar walking around. And then I started playing around with, well, can I have my avatar like interact with things and bounce off of walls? So I put collision on it and have my avatar like run into a wall and walk off. So I almost can gamify that AR and be able to do some really cool things with that. So what it looks like is this. I don't know if it's better than your suit, but it's a pretty good suit. All right. I can design my avatar how I see fit with different body types, with the different styles. As you can see here, I have all these different clothes that I can play around with. And once I create that avatar, like I said, I have a video. This was one of the things I was going to do a live demo with, so hopefully the pictures do it justice. I have a video of me talking, and it takes my motion and actually duplicates it. This creates an FBX file or a GLB file that I can download, and then I can put into Naiad. I can say, hey, make this happen. And I can add audio to it. I can add different levels to it. If you got to see the QR code, you got to actually see this right here, which is where I have my placard with my information, and then my avatar introducing myself, which is kind of cool. What's that? I could, yeah. I've tried doing that with a couple different things. One of the things that my students love is they utilize this, like I said, with a QR code on the business card. A couple of students have put this in their rooms. So when they're away, they have a QR code and it tells people where they are. So one of my students actually had a QR code outside of his dorm room last year that somebody could scan and his avatar would pop up and be like, I'm away this weekend. I'll see you on Monday. And that was like the little message that they would put in. So there's fun things that you could do with this. The other thing that we really like to play around with this, and this is getting more and more development and more depth that you can do with it, is you can actually gamify this. So if you have this set in place, you can actually create games where, like I said, I have my avatar run into a wall and go, ow, and bounce away. All right, I set up the code to be able to do some cool things with that. For you as journalistic storytellers, can you make this interactive? Can you put one of these AR interactions in the spot and be able to have people interact with it? Sorry, I just touched mine. But Adobe Aero came out with something really, really cool. Outside on the wall, there's a QR code on the door as you walk in. If you take your phone and you scan it, you will actually see my introduction to the conference with my avatar and a whole bunch of low poly animals playing in that space, utilizing geospatial AR. That story, that interaction is specifically locked into that location and that longitude and latitude for you to be able to interact with it. And what it looks like is this. I literally just recorded this 10 minutes ago. Let's see. Oh, it's skipping a little bit. We'll go back up. Try one more time. No. This is not the AR, this is the video. So we're going to come back to that in a minute. There we go. So as you can see, I have a whole bunch of stuff right outside the door. There's my avatar waving and saying hi. There's my little owl friend.
Hello, and welcome to Mobile Me&You.
And you're getting an introduction. The audio is not coming through, which is
I'm
fine.
going to be
You're
presenting
getting an
Friday
introduction
at
for
4
my name is
o'clock
Jason
on
Webb.
extending
Welcome
your
to the
reality.
Me&You
I look forward to
conference.
seeing you there.
I hope you come in and enjoy the show. And what's really great is afterwards, I can go in and change the audio on this, and I can update it. And the next time you scan it, it will give you that updated response. Wait, let me get a mic. Yeah, I know, and I forgot to grab a mic. That's on me. I think it's on. Is it?
This is interesting because you're also suggesting a digital, like a visiting card assistant, or like if anybody comes to my site, my homepage, I can put a little QR code or something that says, I'll say hello to you back if you scan that or something and introduce like what you do.
Exactly.
So it's a way to basically add a human interaction element to something that's the static web page. It just describes it in a flat way.
Exactly. And I didn't pay you to say that because my next thing I was going to talk about is one of the things that I've done for my classes and some of my conferences. 2 years ago, I did an XR and research talk for EDUCAUSE. If you know the educational group, they have their conference next week. We did a whole XR research training with myself, Jen Gebline from FIU, Lauren Domingo from HP, and Jeff Chen from HP. And the four of us worked together and came up with this whole presentation. We're like, let's not do like a basic introduction. We actually made a QR code that when you scan the screen, when you came into the class, all four of us popped up as avatars in front of you and introduced who we were and what we were going to talk about in that training. So you had all four of us. And it was funny because the way that I set the idol poses, we looked like a pop band or something like that. We all kind of stood there like this until we talked, something I got to work on. But you were able to actually see us in that space with you. And there was a ton of research I did when I was looking at interactions and being able to do video lessons and everything when I was working on my PhD, did this whole thing about presence in that space, being involved with a person. So if you've ever watched like a voice recorded PowerPoint presentation, how boring are those? Like, have you ever done like a lecture where you just talked over the top of a PowerPoint and your students are like, that was amazing. You ever get that feedback? Probably not. But if you put your video on there and you actually talking and showing emotion, there's a deeper connection there. That's 2D. Now let's make it 3D. What kind of connection are we going to have in that interaction? How deep is that connection going to be? And again, like I said, what type of emotional response are you going to get out of your students that way too? So having that ability to be able to bring that 3D space into play and bring it to the viewers and bring it to the people that are collaborating with you or working with you, this is a fun thing to do. Now with the ability to do geospatial, how many ways can we tell stories in space that is existent? Can we go to the Lincoln Memorial, scan that space and see somebody, a historical figure that has talked there, stand up and start doing their speech and be present in that space? I've talked about doing this in VR all the time. One of the original VR enthusiasts that really got me into VR was Miss Frizzle. Anybody know who I'm talking about? The Magic School Bus? All in. She was the first VR person that ever got involved in education in my mind. But if you think about being able to travel through time and space and be able to replicate what's happening, we do talk about, going to that space and seeing that moment. What would that be like for geospatial AR? What stories could we tell using mobile technology where you can go to a museum and be able to see these things in that space? The hologram, the HoloLens has allowed us to do a lot of holographic work in museums and in historical spaces. We have phones that allow us to do those things. But like I said, there are new technologies that are coming where I could do that with just my glasses. All right. These technologies are going to allow us to be able to tell stories in new ways. Are we ready for that? Can we do that? These are things that I'm trying to teach my students to think about of how am I going to tell these stories in these spaces and embody those spaces and own those spaces as a storyteller. And we do talk about, not for us, without us, being invited into those spaces and having conversations about how do we properly tell those stories with everybody at play and what does that look and feel like? How do we design for the space itself? And that's what AR allows us to do. Now let's add mixed reality into that. How do we move around that space and interact with it? How do we become a part of that space and really get involved with it? There we go. With that being said, one of the things that I really love about doing what I do is being able to create assets to be able to help embellish those spaces. We talked a little bit about using photogrammetry and LiDAR, Polycam and Luma with Gaussian splats. We're doing some really cool stuff right now. This weekend, the reason I'm running all over the place this weekend is we're doing the fall workshop with our photography group. And one of the projects we're doing is we're actually doing some Gaussian splats of a local town, Baldwinsville, And we're going around to all these different spaces and doing Gaussian splats so that we can drop them into Unreal Engine and have people be able to interact with those spaces and see what it's like to be in this town, to be able to see what a small town in this area looks and feels like. We're using Polycam to be able to scan some of their artifacts, some of their statues and some of the signs and everything like that, so that we can put those together and tell stories in a different way to make them more immersive and make them more interactive for the people. The first one I like to use is Blender. Blender, I use that a lot for making assets that are digitally representative. But as you can see here on the right, this is actually a box that is over 100 years old up at Hendricks Chapel up on the main campus. Professor Harper and I, one of my colleagues, scanned that box using Polycam, and this is an asset that we drop into random AR interactions every once in a while. We just put it in there because it's fun to see this pop up. But PowerPoint kind of washed it out a little bit. The color on this thing in Polycam is very vibrant. The textures in it make it look hyper realistic. When a lot of people see that sitting in space or looking through their phone, they do a double take. They'll drop their phone and look and do one of these. All right, being able to kind of make people feel like these assets, these hyper realistic things are in that space is pretty cool. One of the ones that we just started playing around with is the 3D assets called Me&You. And you could do text to 3D generation prompts where you can tell it to actually make something. I did a talk the other day with a bunch of high school students. I'm like, what do you guys want to create today in 3D space? And they came up with a golden retriever with a magician's top hat playing the bass guitar. Within 5 minutes, we had a fully textured 3D dog golden retriever with a top hat playing the bass guitar that we dropped into augmented reality, and they were able to see their model sitting in front of them. Oops, let me get this. Dan, you mind? Right back. Yeah, we just want to for the live stream.
I was just going to ask, are these platforms available to everyone, and do they cost money to use, or how do you?
Blender is especially free. It's an open source program that we use, and I taught for years here. Photogrammetry, LiDAR, Polycam, and Luma are both free. Luma just released Dreammaker, right? Yeah, Dreammaker, which also does what the Me&You does. They're all free to use. They all have premium prices. So each month you might have to wait like a little bit for your credits to restore, but you can use all of these for free. Like I said, my background in K-12, if it's not free, it's going to be hard to use. So I still have that mentality when I do a lot of these things. If I can't experiment and try and see what happens, yeah. Blender especially is a great platform just to get started. If you've never done anything in 3D, it's so much fun to get into and just start playing. And what's really great about Adobe Aero, especially on your phone, you can use that for free. Take that model, drop it onto your phone, and you can push that out to the space in front of you within 5 minutes.
We have a few other people who've tinkered with this stuff for a while. If you could raise your hands. We've got Sunny here. We have Robert Hernandez. There's, of course, Jason and myself. Feel free to just come up to any of us and we can tell you a whole lot about how to create with these and also show you things that we've done. Sunny in particular has an amazing thing he could show you. So.
Always promoting, I love it. So the last thing I want to show you is this right here. We're working with a company, like I said, next semester, I'm going to be teaching a social VR class, and we're going to be doing a quantitative and qualitative study with this and understanding space itself, especially socializing. One of the things, our mission is to bring social back to social media. Right now, when you think of social media, you go to meet somebody in a coffee house. What usually happens when you meet that person in the coffee house? Do you see this? Do you see this? All right, cool. It's good seeing you. And you walk away. All right. Social VR, you take those distractions away from you. You take those things out of your hands and you actually interact with the space and with the people. So this company I'm working with, Engage VR, does this really cool thing with AI interactions. And this is the thing I was talking about. Can we take this technology in the interaction space and put it into an augmented reality space for people to go there using geospatial AR and be able to interact with people in that place? Instead of just going into virtual reality, can we do this in spatial AR? Don't know what I'm talking about? Let me show you a little bit. This is a Metaverse Film School. This actually was recorded 3 weeks ago, and I got to do a demo last Friday. There's a little bit of a lag here, and I will tell you, after 2 weeks of them tinkering with it, the lag's gone. But this is kind of cool.
All right, Molly, let's go.
I got the camera.
All right, I got the microphone.
So what's happening is a film crew is on site. These are real life people in VR.
Hello, sir. Who are you? Do you know what's happening here?
They went up to an AI and started interviewing about a fire that's happening up on that floor.
Oh my God, it's my apartment. It's burning down. Everything I own, everything I love, it's all in there. I can't believe this is happening.
And you can see the monitor, you can see the camera person lining up the shot, you could see the person interviewing. Those are all live people in Engage VR with the headset on, interacting, while that's happening in the background. So the camera person is framing what's happening, working on positioning, and also working on what questions to ask.
Did you just arrive, or were you in this apartment when it happened?
That leg isn't there anymore.
I had just arrived. I wasn't inside when it started. Thank goodness. I had been out, just finishing up at the restaurant. I returned to this chaos. It's devastating to see everything disappearing before my eyes. I can't believe it's all
So what's really cool about this is they're like, this is awesome. You can watch it, observe it, see what's happening, kind of observing as an educator or a teacher, helping them with interviewing. You can walk around. You can also record that in 3D space. So later on, other students can come back in here and say, play recording from earlier, and it will open up this whole interaction, and they can actually walk around and watch it again as they move in that 3D space and actually critique.
everything's a blur of
Were you looking at them? Did you look away too much? Like, was your positioning wrong? What type of things that you could do to help improve the way that you conducted this interview? Of course, it's always fun to have the flyaway. The next one is we talk about being able to interact with people and being able to use social cues. This one works with medical interactions and being able to handle how people interact with each other.
Hello, it's nice to meet you. What brings you in today? What symptoms are you experiencing?
So you have your own medical doctor to be able to interact with.
I have a very bad headache.
So imagine being able to go into the doctor's office and meet with a general practitioner before you actually meet with a doctor. It will log all this information and be able to feed you, give you some feedback.
Rate the pain on a scale from 1 to 10.
Let's make our own AI-powered avatar inside Engage. Choose create and edit.
So it shows how to be able to make that avatar and be able to interact with that space itself. Thank you. And utilize it to be able to tell stories and have kind of prompts. Educationally, this increases the ability to create personalized learning and being able to interact with, I still doing this, interact with an AI or for a student to be able to interact with that AI to be able to drive their education and do the same thing over and over and over again before they actually do the thing. Medical field, I worked with a bunch of friends down at Yale Pediatric XR department. They're doing these crazy things where they're able to regenerate in spaces these different experiences for students before they even interact with cadavers or any other live pieces to be able to personalize their learning and practice that thing over and over again. If you've ever seen the movie The Matrix where Neo's like, I need to fly a helicopter, and they download it into him in that moment, that's how I feel right now, is we have that opportunity to download this information into people and do it very, very quickly. All right, and repetitiously. And as an educator, the more repetitions you get to do something, the better it is. Now, let's turn that to journalism. How can we take this and be able to train our journalists to be able to tell better stories using mobile technology, be able to practice how we do that. And then the next level, like I said, is being able to make it interactive and fluid in those spaces. Being able to go to a place and be like, something happened at this place. What happened? And have the AI be able to have a conversation with you. The one I really like, and I didn't put it up there, is they actually created 12 different avatars: Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Cleopatra, and a couple others, where you can go in and their AI is built off of all of their information, all of their writings, all of the knowledge base that they have about them, and you can actually ask them questions about their life and about what happened to them, and they will answer you. As a kid in K-12, that was something I always wish I had the opportunity to do, is to actually be able to interview and ask people questions and have a conversation with these historical figures. So much more than being able to read it on a book or look at pictures or watch a video, but to be able to interact that emotional connection, that drive, that ability to have a conversation brings one, that learning up, and two, that storytelling to a whole new level in my world. All right. This is where I think we're going next and what we can do. I don't know. What do you guys think? Questions, comments, concerns? Lauren. All right, ready? No, I'm just kidding. Okay.
Our dean likes to run up here like Donahue, but I'm afraid I'll trip. That's dating us.
Thank you. This was super interesting. I don't know if you have the answer to this, and if you don't, that's okay.
I'll make it up.
Great. So I'm imagining like what, if you use something like this as a tool to train journalists to interview people and like, in breaking news situations, we can't listen to a police scanner and say, great class, there is a fire somewhere. Let's go to the active fire, right? That's harder, right? Or if you're saying you're going to interview people, and they've experienced traumatic situations, and maybe you just did a great training on trauma-informed interviewing, and now we want to put it into practice. Is there anything about if doing that interaction in a virtual setting, which is not real, the skills translate when you're in front of a real person, or if it suddenly doesn't feel.
Welcome to my research.
Wonderful.
So in XR education, one of the things we talk about, and a lot of my research is based around cognitive load and being able to understand the spaces and being able to ramp those spaces. And a lot of what I got into and why I thought of it was a study from South Korea where they did laparoscopic surgery in mixed reality. So they were using the actual devices, but they had a headset on that simulated the operation studio. And in this study, what they did is every week they added more information to that studio, the operation suite. And as they went through the process of still using the tools themselves, but being in this operating suite and being able to see what they were doing, they saw that their cognitive load stayed low. So for those of you who don't know what cognitive load is, or if you need a refresher, it's your mental task and ability to process what you're learning and being able to digest it and put it to long-term memory. They saw that they hit what was called like the Goldilocks zone for a lot of students going through that. So each week, as they felt more comfortable doing the surgery or doing the thing, they would add more distractors in there that you would have as a surgeon. You would hear the beeping of the heart rate monitor. You would see people walking by. You would see the anesthesiologist talking to you. All these different things are happening around you, and they learned how to actually understand that space. When they went in and started practicing in real life, they noticed that their cognitive load and their heart rate was exponentially lower than those people who jumped right into a surgery suite and started performing that thing. Can we do that same thing by being able to practice with that? The skills are applicable because you get to rehearse it and practice it over and over and over again. And that hopefully when they get in and the application of that thing allows them to be able to run the simulations and then feel comfortable with what they're doing when they're in the field. There's always going to be, when you're in that real life, until you're in that real life situation, there's always going to be that anxiety, but can we bring that down a little bit more? And so far from the studies that I've read and looked at and understood, and the one I did, the cognitive load and the heart rate and the energy behind what they were doing was dropped when they were applied in the real world. And that's a pretty intense thing to think about when it comes to being able to take a simulation and apply it in a realistic environment. That's why right now in the medical field for XR is exponentially growing from being able to do these things multiple times where they weren't able to do that before and then go and apply it. Case Western during 2020, during the pandemic, pivoted everybody online, bought all students HoloLenses, and they saw an exponential growth in their students' assessments from using the HoloLenses and interacting with digital assets. And then when they finally were in person being able to do the thing, they saw that they were understanding and being able to apply that thing that they were doing, working with the cadavers and whatnot. And they also, a lot of medical schools talk about how they've spent all this money on the XR, but actually exponentially saved money on the back end of not having to buy cadavers, buying equipment that has to be sterilized, being able to do all those things. And it's repetitious. A student, again, personalized learning can do it over and over and over again. And like Neo, learn to fly that helicopter very quickly. Sure.
Use the force.
Use the force. The force will be with me. I'm going to get a little metaphysical here, maybe, but what is your sense of, and for anybody else who works in this, sort of more VR, extended, augmented reality space, what is your sense of the experience people have when they're doing it? Do they feel like they are interacting with reality? Or do they kind of know it's this sort of murky intermediary? Like, what is the body of knowledge on that?
Do I have another 40 minutes to talk?
Please.
I got another presentation completely lined up for you. No, so like I said, one of my goals is to take that virtual reality and drive it closer to reality. And there's a lot of studies that are contradictory of like, if it's too real, then people are going to get dissonance from it. They're going to, have an eerie feeling. That's called the uncanny valley. If you ever want to see some funny articles from Morishi Mori, he had a robot that he used to take around that looked identical and acted identical to him to prove his uncanny valley. If you ever watch the Polar Express with the dead eyes of the characters in there because they didn't motion track the faces, that's an example of if it's too real and there's something that's wrong, people get pulled out of it very quickly. There is that sense spatial presence. There's presence that people feel. For a lot of students and people that I've interviewed in a couple of my studies, I said, how was the realism? Did you feel like you were there? And they're like, it wasn't a matter of the realism, but I felt like I had a connection because I started recognizing things and it started drawing to my deeper memory. I had one experience where I had a coral reef and I had people walking around the reef. One of the things I wanted to test was, were my sensors working? And I had a shark go overhead. And the first couple of people I had, they had a fight or flight moment when that shark swam overhead. It was just a little coral shark, went overhead, harmless, right? But I watched their heart rate go up and come back down again. I went, that's kind of weird. And I was talking to somebody about it, like, yeah, that's fight or flight. I went, great. So they feel present in that space. And I was asking about, I'm like, did that feel real? And they're like, for a moment, I looked at it and went, that thing's coming right for me. And you watch the heart rate go up and they felt present in that space. And when it went by, they said they had a moment where they're like, that was way too close. And then I had a participant go into it and her heart rate spiked up and she was watching it and I was watching her and I went back and watched the film later and I'm like, oh, you had a fight or flight moment. You were present in the space. She goes, no, I used to swim in the coral reef in Hawaii and I used to swim with coral sharks all the time. And I was so excited to see it. My heart rate went up. So she felt like she was present in the space and that fired memories that she had and made her feel like she was there. One of the things that we're worried about for some of these things, and this is where I'm always ethically thinking about it, is depending on the age and the people that you put in that, is there a chance for false narratives? Do those people 6 months from now think that they actually went swimming in the coral reef? The optimist in me is like, hey, you went swimming in the coral reef digitally. You really liked what you saw. Go do it. But I also worry about, depending on the people that we put into those spaces, are they going to have those false narratives because it was so real and it was an experience and they had emotional tie to it? Are those things going to make them feel like, oh, I did that? So those are the stories and those are the things that we constantly are trying to consider and think about as we design these spaces too. Like I said, I have another half-an-hour speech if you want to go on that one. Yeah. Yep.
So it's interesting that you brought, yeah. So this is a different kind of weeds question. So one of the challenges I've seen in politics is when journalists are interviewing people who don't share their values. Some journalists are liberal, they're interviewing conservative politicians. The sense of morality that will come from the other side completely flummoxes the way the journalists are framing their actual asking points. And then they don't know what to do. It'll become like a confrontation. And the politicians will say, you media guys are always like this, blah, 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 and so on. We've seen enough of this. There is a search for cultural intelligence and framing that's cross-ideological, that vocabulary exists. It's not that you can't actually train people. Do you think this approach could be used to train journalists for interviewing in culturally complex issues? It's not just left versus right. You can also go to another country and you have to be asking like a whole bunch of things. I feel you're talking about flight simulators for journalistic interviewing. There seems to be that there.
Surface level, yes.
Yeah.
We got to start somewhere, is what I'll say to that. Like, yeah, this is very surface level, like, oh, here's an interview, they're going to answer questions, fine. But then we get into, like you said, you get into the right versus left, the cultural conflicts, all that stuff. Actually, the medical field right now has trainings where you actually interact with a client who's very upset with you. And depending on the verbiage you use and the way that you talk and the tone that you use, it recognizes that and will come back at you just as fast. And it's actually a really cool thing for like public interactions and HR type of stuff of like, how do you present yourself? And what they're starting to use is, and like I said, with motion tracking, they're actually starting to use software. The Vive was really good at this, being able to like track motion in those spaces. If you go like this too fast, like the client will step back and think that you're confronting them and recognize those nonverbal cues. And that's another thing that we're starting to look at is not only is it the way that I talk and the way that I ask those questions, but my body language. how do we take that into consideration too with those interviews? So if you're talking to me and I'm asking you questions and I'm doing one of these and just kind of turning away from you as an interviewee, what's your first thought about that? Like, oh, he doesn't care about this. He's just going to take my story and go publish it. And all of a sudden you shut down as your interviewee. So those are things that as conversations are continuing around, how do we develop that? Again, ethically, how do we bring those into that conversation? How do we continuously progress? And like I said, the leg that you saw there, within 2 weeks, they were able to fix, which is kind of cool. Now, the next steps, how do we actually bring other elements into this? So it's not just surface level, like you ask a question, you get an answer, and you move on with it. There's a lot more nuances that we're on the cusp of getting there. But again, very optimistic about it, but any other questions? If you want to continue conversation, I would love to continue talking. On all socials, this was back when I was teaching K-12, my LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, at Mr. Webb 7, before I got my PhD. And then email, by all means, please contact me. I'd love to continue the conversation. And like I said, there's so much more that we can get into. And I will say, as somebody who, I have to add this one to your conversation about volumetric capturing, it's not dead. I've been working with a couple of companies, like I said, bridging that gap of reality in XR. There's a great company down in New York City called Evercoast that's working with another company called Zero Space. They have a full production lab that is doing some insanely cool stuff. Yes, we went down and toured them and it was just insane what they're doing. They used to use Depth Kit, which we used here for a little bit. And we're like 2.5D. Evercoast, what they're able to do with the full Vicon cameras and the capturing to it, that's something that, again, if I had all the time in the world and the research and being able to move forward, there's some cool things happening with that. And that hyperrealism is coming. And I'm excited to see what it is. But again, I will warn you of this. Always think ethically of how we can move forward in a positive light and how we're going to address those things. And I got another presentation for you on accessibility too, if you guys want to talk later. But thank you for your time. I really appreciate you guys and your questions.